Okay, well, God bless everybody. And today the topic is change your history. Change your history. Now, it seems like an impossibility because nobody can go back into the past. But we can change what will become our history by what we deal with now because it will become our future. We've all heard the statement, history repeats itself. And we've even seen our own history repeat itself time and again and again. And this seems to be a big flaw of mankind. And on the converse, all God ever wanted for us is supreme abundance, to live in our own personal paradise. That's how He designed it. Adam and Eve lived in paradise, and someday we will too, long time from now. But right now, we can have a lot more than we have. Emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially, in all ways. That's God's design for us. He wants our history of success to repeat, not our history of failure. He wants our successes to stack up so high and so quickly that we stop fixating on the failures, which is typically mankind's problem. It's looking at what you don't have. And we're going to see that today as we study two men, one Moses and one Job. And we'll see how their lives are intertwined to the point where our lives are changed and our history can be changed. See, the eternal one built into our nature the ability to grow, to prosper, and to have all our need met our entire lives, both now and even for eternity. You don't have to save up for eternity. You don't even think about that. I better save up a little more money for eternity. Well, you know, it shouldn't be any less of a thought of abundance now, because you know God's going to take care of you then. It shouldn't be any less abundance now thinking about our own future. It's just a mindset, and we've been trained so improperly by this world. See, the Creator has totally set us up for success. Like Philippians 4:13 says from the ERV, "My God will use His glorious riches to give you everything you need. He will do this through Christ Jesus." See, God giving us everything we'll ever need sounds pretty good. But I'm sure there's something we have to do in order to get that. He didn't just drop it in our lap. That's not how life really works. And all that's ever been promised us has to be out there for us all. Deuteronomy 28:12 and 13 from the GW says, "The Lord will open the window of heaven, His rich storehouse for you. He will send rain on your land at the right time and bless everything you do. He will be able to make loans to many nations, or you will be able to make loans to many nations, but won't need to borrow from any." Excuse me. "The Lord will make you the head, not the tail. You will always be on top, never at the bottom." Now, isn't that what we want? To always be on top of our lives? Sure. You know, we're absolutely and totally set up for success. That's what God has always wanted. But we don't always see it that way. We don't feel it that way. Our bank account doesn't show it that way. You know, we want to train ourselves to see that continuity of abundance. You know, why do things seem to come so easily for some people, while at other times it seems so difficult for me? You know, why do I keep falling into the same old traps time and again? And we say that we want to change, yet we keep living the same old way, doing the same old things. You know, because of this, the self-helper industry makes billions of dollars trying to help us change our history. And sadly, just like most lives, it's proven that most of the books we buy are never completely read. And those that are completed, and their sage advice is typically not remembered for very long because we just go back to living our old way. We're comfortable. We're well trained to live like we live. So it takes a different mindset, and that's what we're going to try to glean from Job and Moses today. And it may be a little bit different than what you've heard before. Here's a quote from a man named George Santayana, a Spanish philosopher, poet, and novelist in the 1800s. Quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Am I destined to repeat my history over and over again? The answer is yes, unless I change something. And there must be a better way. And there is. God has us covered. If we can put on and maintain His eternal perspective for our lives, the true one, not a religious one, and we do this for a prolonged period of time, we will absolutely change what will become our history. We can absolutely change what will be our history if we can just put the time in to look at our lives through God's eternal perspective. Now, God knew our history would repeat. God, the architect of all life, has observed mankind for centuries and for millennia. And that's not all. Isaiah 57:15 says that God even inhabits eternity. And how big is that? He sees all our successes and missed opportunities. He has all the time and resources in the world to help you and I today. It's said that one of the only things God can't do is to change the past. He can only help you change your future and change your now. Quote from Socrates, "The secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." A lot of people are about to go into the new year with New Year's resolutions. You can beat yourself up about what you didn't do, or you can just put all your energy into getting what you want. The new. Put on the new man, right? You get rid of the old. It's not easy to do. And that's where you're going to see Job had some real difficulty. That means God is at this very moment in your future working to set up your personal success for today. And that's the perspective of all miracles. That's the perspective of all coincidence. That eternal view is why we sometimes say, man, that happened just at the right time. Those words or that check came in. You ever notice when you really, 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 really have to have that money, you get it? You find a way? That's the energy. If you put that in all the time, you would have far more than you have now. We just wait till we really, 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 really have to have something before we really start believing, putting the energy in. And we'll see that Job did the same thing. Moses did the same thing. And, how would you like the miraculous to happen more often? We all would. Why not? God's a God of miracles. Here's a quote. "Do something today that your future self will thank you for." Somebody named Unknown. And the other morning I asked my lovely wife to tell me what advice she would have told her younger self if she could go back in time. Now, skeptical of my question, she asked me, "What are you getting at?" So as I began to tell her the premise of today's teaching, she finally looked up from what must have been a very interesting stack of mail and almost said too quickly, I wouldn't tell my youthful self much of anything. I had a blast until I was about 30, but I would have told my 40-year-old self a mouthful. Now, I felt a little weird, eerily strange at that time because I met her after she was 30. Hope I wasn't part of that problem. Probably was. And she also said, I would demand that the 40-year-old me leave a certain job that had bosses and wannabe leaders who were sucking the life out of me because I stayed in it too long. I would have told myself to take better care of my body, and I would have shown the younger me the path to set me up financially. And that was her quick answer. And I realized she would have discussed basically the big three, health, prosperity, and relationships. And who you hang out with, I guess that's another one, which is relationship. Thankfully, none of us are going to get a visit from an older version or an older or wiser version of ourselves. There's no ghost of Christmas future that's going to shock us into changing our present habits in order to make right our future. That would be weird. You wouldn't want something like that appearing and taking you somewhere else. God sees our failures as and has a paved way with words and a spiritual connection for us to make an amazing future. And we can and will create a great legacy for ourselves. And we can and we will change what will become of the history of our lives. So that's really the intro to what I'm getting at here. The first written lesson for the spiritually minded. And let's spin it back a few thousand years now. And what we're going to get to is the very first thing that a godly person ever wrote. This had never been done before. And in that God inhabits eternity and knows exactly what we need to do to live the amazing life He designed for us, because God already supplied all our need, couldn't He tell us what we need to do or think or act upon to grab our prize, to have our need met? The answer is absolutely. If you could peer for a moment into the mind of God, without blowing your own mind, and view from His eternal perspective how all of mankind repeatedly makes the same mistakes, falls into the same traps, and has to keep starting over, what would you tell the people of the earth? And we're going to see this is what Moses did, and allowed him to save millions of people and take a stand against the most powerful force on earth, which was Egypt at that time, because of what he learned from a man named Job. You see, long before the laws of Moses are written, long before the Ten Commandments, long before Jesus graced the earth, there were laws designed by man to control the people of the earth, because people were out of control. The code of Ur-Nammu was etched into stone a full 1,000 years before the Ten Commandments. Etched in stone. The code of Hammurabi was inscribed on a pillar of rock 500 years before the law of Moses. The Chinese also wrote down early laws to try to make order out of disorder. And most of these laws were harsh and deadly because man had become self-willed, harsh and deadly, and very judgmental. This living under the thumb of a tyrant wasn't what God had in mind when He formed, made, and created true humanity and promised him or her paradise. That's our promise, folks. Whether you like it or not, you're going to live in paradise someday. And you can have a taste of that now. Wouldn't you like that? Wouldn't you like to not have to worry about the future, the next paycheck, the next relationship? Sure. Laws are really meant for the lawless. Now, we need laws because this world is flat out crazy. But a true believer, it's a different mindset. We live above that law. In Genesis 6:4-6 from the Voice says, "The Eternal One saw that the wickedness was rampaging throughout the earth, and that evil had become the first thought on every mind, the constant purpose of every person. At that point, God's heart broke, and He regretted having ever made man in the first place." That's a pretty sad testament. God knew life would be better for us all, but He had to somehow instruct us and give His man, His spiritually minded people, a set of tools to help avoid the traps and the distractions that keep us from our promised abundance. And that keeps us from our promised potential dominance. I mean, we're designed to dominate. We're designed to have all our need met. God has given us all things that pertain to life and godliness. He supplied all our need according to His riches and glory. We can do all things through Christ. If we believe, we receive, Jesus said. You can move mountains. But there just can be no doubt. Now, enter a guy named Moses. Moses was born a Hebrew slave, but was miraculously adopted, raised, and educated in the Pharaoh's court. This guy Moses had an amazing heart. God knew that he would get it and be the first one who would someday be ready, willing, and able to write down a few pointers from God to help us spiritually minded humans. Well, Moses was grossly misunderstood when he started talking up his new freedom to these Hebrew slaves in Egypt. And he gets attacked by the people he wanted to help, so that at 40 years old, he skulks out of the country alone and broke. And he makes it many, many miles across a desert wilderness and runs into a few shepherd girls. He ends up marrying one of these girls, and he too becomes a shepherd. He went from being the adopted son of the Pharaoh king to caring for sheep under another man. And Moses took a step back, and we'll find that it was to take a huge step forward. And the father of his wife was a man named Jethro. Now, Jethro really isn't a name. Jethro is a title. Jethro means excellency. And he was called this because he helped his fellow man understand the one true God, which is an excellent thing to do. And this excellent man, Jethro, his real name was Reuel, was not a Hebrew at all. He was not of the tribe of Israel that was trapped in Egypt. He was different, but yet he was still a man. He was still a man that loved God. And he was still a prophet of God, which is mind-boggling. And there were two other non-Hebrew men living in an area at that time, at the same time, who were considered men of God. There was Jethro, Balaam, and Job. Jethro, Balaam, and Job were all prophets of God, yet they weren't of the Hebrew people. And Moses himself had been raised in a hodgepodge of the Hebrew religion and the study of the Egyptian gods. And he had some unlearning to do in order to change what would become his history. He was not the greatest man on earth yet, but there was somebody God called the greatest man on earth, and it wasn't Moses. From 40 years old to 80 years old, Moses lived near his father-in-law Jethro and became acquainted in some way to Job. And because of what he learned from Jethro and Job, his future history and ours was about to change. Enter Job. Job was the richest and most powerful man on earth. And he was the most powerful of these three non-Hebrew believers as well. And Job figured out the law of attracting unbelievable abundance by trusting God, by keeping his mind on God, by a steady, faithful work ethic, and by maintaining a specific thought process. And he also controlled his words. And he made the unbelievable believable. He did something that nobody else on earth had ever done. And Moses was going to learn and even take it further. Job 1, we're going to read 1 through 3 from the Message. Job was a man who lived in Uz. And that's in the same area. That's just in a different, it's not that far from Egypt, not that far from Midian, where Jethro was from, not that far from the Sinai Peninsula, that whole area of the world. And so he was honest inside and out, a man of his word, who was totally devoted to God and hated evil with a passion. Well, how did he know about evil? Well, Romans tells us that we know what the right from wrong, that every human's born with that innate ability. Everybody has the word written in their heart, believer or non-believer. It's there, but we're world trained, and we're trained not to see evil and not to see good. So we just live average. We live between the two. And this guy had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He was also very wealthy. 7,000 head of sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 team of oxen, 500 donkeys, and a huge staff of servants, the most influential man in all the East. Job was the most influential man in all the East. He was an amazing example of God and for God. And God blessed him incredibly, even though he wasn't what people would call a believer. He wasn't their brand. Job was totally into God, and he set his mind to live above the fray of the world. He saw it. And the devil was also aware and had to find a way to get this Job fellow to stop his own progress. Isn't that how it usually works? You beat yourself. First you beat yourself up, then you beat yourself. And that's how it usually works. Bad habits, negative thoughts, and hanging out with other negative people are usually the recipe for self-destruction. And look at this conversation between God and the devil about Job. And the Bible in the New Testament says that the devil accuses us daily. So Job 1, we're going to read 8 through 12 from the Voice, the Eternal One. Well, have you looked into the man Job, my servant? He is unlike any other person on the whole earth, a very good man. His character is spotless, his integrity unquestioned. In fact, he so believes in me that he seeks in all things to honor me and deliberately avoids evil in all of his affairs. The accuser. I won't argue with you that he is pious, but is all of this believing in you and honoring you for no reason? Haven't you encircled him with your very own protection? And not only him, but his entire household and all that he has? Not only this, but your blessings accompanies whatever his hand touches. And see how his possessions have grown? It's easy to be so pious in the face of such prosperity. God said that Job lived at a different level from everyone else on the entire earth. That Job is an amazing believer and a super self-disciplined human. The accuser replies that he's a good person only because he's so well taken care of because of God. Now, how do we translate that to us? You ever said, well, that person, he prospers because he came from a rich family. It's the same thing. That's the same thing the devil said. Or he prospers because, he's lucky. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. We got to watch what we say and how we say it. We're just trained to follow right in suit with the words of the accuser. And that's why we accuse ourselves so often. It's time to stop. It's wild. God was proud of Job and proud that he worked so hard to become a success. And the devil blurted out that Job is only a success because he's so well cared for. Which is right? Who's right? They both sound good. One is an aggressive, positive attitude, while the other is dependent on somebody else to make you good. Which is right? This dichotomy of thought is the premise of this entire book. This shift of attitude caused Job to both prosper unbelievably and later to fail miserably, and later yet to end up twice as good as his highest point ever was in the past. How would you like to end up twice as good? 10 times as good? Ask yourself this question. Are you blessed because you're a success? Or are we a success because we're blessed? That's what Job had to figure out. And that's really the tipping point there. And the actual first book of the Bible, chronologically, the first, Job was that first book of the Bible. Why? Why? The book of Job must be the foundation, must contain within it the foundation for all success, as well as the most clear warning of the path to failure. It shows the way to great abundance and the way to incredible devastation. It's there. Why was Moses exposed to this guy? Well, he was going to have to go into the most deadly situation and convince a group of millions of people to follow him, and convince a powerful king to let them follow him out there, and to give him all the wealth of the world. Now, imagine going into a country. I want you to let all the millions of people go, plus give me all the money in the national bank account. What country would do that? Well, if you did things exactly the way God wanted you to do them, you would be able to talk yourself into incredible riches, incredible prosperity. See, Moses probably met this remarkable Job during his time with Jethro. He probably met Job. He was alive at that time. He was old. He'd already gone through this. Imagine what he learned by listening to and watching these two prosperous and excellent believers. He'd never seen that among the Hebrews. He saw good people. He had a great mom. But God, all they had to work just to survive. Slavery's not fun. People think it is. Oh, I'd sure like someone just to take fully good care of me. That's slavery. Take full care of you. Take care of yourself. Imagine the stories around a campfire. Imagine sitting there with Jethro and Job telling this whole story of what he went through. Oh my gosh. Those stories changed the world. Imagine hearing Job's first-hand recounting of what he learned from his success and from his failure. Now the success of failure. Sometimes we learn more from failures than successes. We have all heard that. And I'm going to read a few quotes here that I think would bless you. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Thomas Edison. Success is the ability to go from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. Winston Churchill. Failure is only the opportunity to begin again, only this time more wisely. Henry Ford. Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time we fail. Confucius. Develop success from failures. Discouragement and failure are two of the surest stepping stones to success. Dale Carnegie. There are no secrets to success. It's the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. Colin Powell. It is fine to celebrate success, but it's more important to heed the lessons of failure. Bill Gates. Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of a greater or equal benefit. Napoleon Hill. My great concern is not whether you have failed, but whether you are content with failure. Abraham Lincoln. And the last one, remember that failure is an event, not a person. Zig Ziglar. You're never a failure, but you may have failed. It's an attitude, folks. If we consider ourselves a failure, we're going to see it happen many times. If we fail and just get up and keep going, that's a success. God never promised no problems. He just promised solutions. In that Moses wrote the book of Job long before he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, it might just be important. Moses recorded Job's downfall and thinking of action. Over and over again, Job tricked himself and trained himself into thinking that both abundance and lack were to be expected, and that God was both good and bad. Why would he do that? Well, it's a lot of pressure. To stay a success is not easy. People hate you. People stand against you. People want to be your friend who aren't really friendly because they want a little bit of what you have. They want to learn from you, but they don't want to give back to you, which takes and takes and takes, and it steals your soul life. Over time, misplaced thoughts, blaming words, unproductive friends, negative actions lead anyone down the path of pain. Well-chosen thoughts always taking responsibility for our actions and never blaming others for our misfortune, hanging out with people who will pull the best out of us and taking repeated actions are what lead us to the path of prosperity. You know, Job 3:25 says, "For the thing which I greatly feared has come upon me, and that which I was afraid of has come unto me." Excuse me. Great fear took a great many negative thoughts that were acted on habitually. It took Job a long time to bring himself down. Long time. It wasn't just he got afraid one day. He trained himself into failure. See, small behaviors over time frame us into what we have and who we are. Now we're going to take a look inside Job's head. Can someone get me a water bottle over there, please? It's in that refrigerator right there. You know, it wasn't one single thing that caused Job to lose focus. It was thousands of thoughts, you know, that manifested into words and actions and behaviors. Thank you very much. This behavior became Job's inner philosophy, his self-made belief system. You know, these are a sample of the words that Job spouted to his friends for 6 months. And I'm going to show them to you. You know, they were deeply rooted in his head and in his heart. And God heard them and recorded them for Moses and for us. Now, this isn't just the hurt talking. These were thoughts that took away all his wealth, his kids, and his health. You know, it's interesting to note that his grown kids must have taken on the same self-destructive thoughts and words and actions for them to have lost their lives. And so Job, he starts off feeling sorry for himself. Job 3:1. After he opened his mouth, after this he opened his mouth and cursed his day. 3:3. Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said there was a man-child conceived. You know, I mean, most people have thought, you know, why am I alive? You know, that's that loser thought. That's the thoughts that help take us down. 3:11. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? You know, in other words, why didn't I die when I was born? He thought it would be better that way. This is stuff he's telling Moses. Job 9:17 and 18. Here's where he blames God. For he breaketh me with the tempest, and multiplieth my wounds without cause. He will not suffer me to take breath. He filleth me with bitterness. He's saying this about God. Job is. 9:22-24. This is one thing, therefore I said it. He destroyeth the perfect and the wicked. If the scourge slay suddenly, he will laugh at the trial of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges. If not, where and who is he? 9:28. I'm afraid of all my sorrows. I know that thou wilt not hold me innocent. Now, again, we're talking about Job. This is his thought process. These are the things that took him down. 9:30-31. If I wash myself with snow water and make my hands never so clean, yet shalt thou plunge me in the ditch, and mine own clothes shall abhor me. You know, I mean, that's pretty graphic. You know, I mean, he says he can't even clean himself with fresh water. You know, it just shows his attitude toward himself, spiritually, mentally, physically here. You know, when you think your clothes don't even want to be on you. You know, that's not thinking too highly of oneself. And then he says in 33-34, neither is there any daysman betwixt us that might lay his hand upon us both. Let him take his rod away from me, and let not his fear terrify me. I mean, he's saying his rod, that's a stick that you beat somebody with. So his attitude had changed from being somebody who just loved and had that great, beautiful attitude toward God. Now he's looking down on him. And we do light versions of it. How come he got the job and I didn't, God? It's the same thing. We're still blaming God. You know, how come I'm sick? Why did this happen to me? God, you know. And we think, oh, we wouldn't do that. We all do that stuff, you know. I mean, it takes a lot of work not to. Now he's going to complain about other people. I am as one mocked of his neighbors, who calleth upon God, and he answereth him. The just upright man is laughed to scorn. He's saying that just people are the ones laughed at. 12:6, the tabernacles of robbers prosper, and they that provoke God are secure, and in whose hand God bringeth abundantly. He's saying, look, man, these guys are the robbers and bad people prosper more than we do. And this was the richest man of the East saying this. So where was his head? And with him is strength and wisdom, and the deceived and the deceiver are his. We know that he lost most of his wealth in one day, but I'll bet there was a slow, gradual decline leading up to this. What we read in the Bible, it looks like it happened in 1 second. But typically, this thinking had to go across a process of time. There was probably a slow dripping away of everything he had, and the respect of his workers and their vigilance, and his children. With him is strength and wisdom. The deceiver and the deceiver are his. You know, he's saying they're like one. He taketh away the heart of the chief of the people of the earth, and causes them to wander in a wilderness where there is no way. They grope in the dark without a light. He maketh them to stagger like a drunken man. Remember, this is just Job's ramblings. This is over a period of time. And he's still blaming God for destroying his life in 16:8. And thou hast filled me with wrinkles, which is a witness against me. He's getting skinnier and skinnier. And my leanness rising up in me beareth witness to my face. 16:11 and 12. God hath delivered me to the ungodly, and turned me over into the hands of the wicked. Which means there had to be something else going on here, more than that one day of troubles. He was slowly losing what he had. I was at ease, but he hath broken me asunder. He hath also taken me by the neck, and shaken me to pieces, and set me up for his mark. It's like marking a calf out to be slaughtered. You see, 19:6, know now that God hath overthrown me, and hath compassed me with his net. This is some negative stuff. These aren't verses you want to memorize, you know. But this is what he memorized. This is what he thought. I mean, just think what goes on in that innermost part of your mind all day long. Is it good stuff? Is it powerful stuff? Is it positive stuff? Is it prosperous, abundant, sufficient stuff? Self-sufficient stuff? Or is it lack and want? You know, he says he has fenced up my way that I cannot pass. He has set darkness in my path. He has stripped me of my glory, and taken the crown from my head. He hath destroyed me on every side, and I'm gone. And mine hope hath he removed like a tree. God has chopped me down. That's what he was saying. He said, even my close friends reject me. 19:14, my kinsfolk has failed, and my familiar friends have forgotten me. And verse 19, all my inward friends have bored me, and they whom I loved are turned against me. Now, even his friends, he was saying turned against him. And he wonders why the ungodly prosper and not him. I don't need to keep reading these. I think you get the point. You know, he said in 23:2 and 3, even today is my complaint bitter. My stroke is heavier than my groaning. I'm getting hurt more than I let on, is what he's saying. And oh, that I were, that I might find him, and that I might even come to his seat. Now he's looking for God. And didn't it say that he was like friendly with God earlier? But now in his mind, he can't even find him in his mind. And behold, I go forward, and he's not here, and backward, but I cannot perceive him. You know, where are you, God? I don't see you anymore. You know, how come I didn't get that job? How come I didn't get that account? How come I'm sick and everybody else isn't? Whatever. How come everybody else seems to have a good thing going and I don't? Why did you leave me, God? Where were you when I needed you? I see this every day on the internet. People turn away from God because of the bad things happening in the world. Well, it's not his fault. And I guess the last couple of things here. He says he said in 31:33, if I covered my transgressions as Adam by hiding, mine iniquity in my bosom, would things be different? In other words, now he's trying to take the attention off himself and shift it back to Adam. I didn't blow it like Adam did, But don't we do that? Well, I only did this because he did it, or he said it, or they set me up to fail, or my boss did this, or my boss did that, or my wife, or my husband, or my boyfriend, my girlfriend. You see? Oh, that verse 35 and 36. Oh, that one would hear me. Behold, my desire is that the Almighty would answer me, and that mine adversary had written a book. Surely I would take it upon my shoulder, and I would bind it as a crown unto me. Now, many people have been taught that he's talking about the adversary, the devil here. Now think about this. Who is he talking about as being his enemy this whole time? God. And why would he want to bind the devil's book to his head like a crown? He's talking about God both being the Almighty and at the same time being his adversary. That's what it's saying here, folks. Just read the context instead of just a few verses pulled out of context and memorized. He wished that there was a book written, and he would bind it to him. Because then if he knew what the enemy was going to do, then he'd know what to avoid. And if he kept his mind toward the Almighty, then he'd have a better life. He knew this stuff, but he didn't get it. He had nothing to go to. There was no scriptures. There was no Bible. There was nothing written then. And this is right before Moses was there to spend time with him or learn about him. And so it's crazy stuff. See, we fall into those same traps, those same problems, and we wonder why it seems like everybody else gets all the breaks but not us. Why did you let that happen, God? It's the same thing. How come everybody else is prospering and not me? And this book, he wished was written, that he was wearing these words like a crown, helped solidify for Moses what he needed to write for God someday. This stuff was for Moses and Job and us. Writing Job and the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were Moses' job, but they were Job's inspiration. You see, or came from Job's inspiration, should I say. Job had at times allowed himself to think like the pagans, and that God was both good and bad. And we got to stop thinking that way. We got to stop thinking that we're good and bad and think that we're fantastic, we're amazing, we're spectacular, we're beautiful. Doesn't matter if you have a little weight on, you're beautiful. Do the best you can with what you got. Doesn't matter if you don't have the job of your dreams. Figure out how to get the job of your dreams. You think God has it out there for you? It's promised. It's promised. But we talk ourselves out of it like Job did. Job went from being the richest man in the East to the poorest man in the East and to the double rich. How did he do it? Well, he just learned to control his mind and actions. And he stopped blaming God for his problems. He stopped looking at what everybody else thought about him, his friends and frenemies. You see? Job allowed himself to think like the pagans, that God was both good and bad. It took Jesus Christ to fully expose this faulty thinking, but Job had a lesson that helped Moses have the guts to go to walk back into Egypt and to lead the children of Israel out. Some of them didn't want to leave. And there was times when they were in the wilderness, they wanted to go back. There was times where they wanted to live like they used to. And a lot of them died because of that. I mean, it's wild stuff. In conclusion, God answered Job and brought him back to the reality of truth. You know, Job then refocused his entire lifestyle. Every single word, every action, blaming no one, taking responsibility for his own life and his own failure, and believed in God's absolute power, care, and direction. If we do that, we too can change the history of our lives. Totally believe in God's absolute power, God's absolute protection, his absolute care, and his absolute love for us. Job 42:5-6 says, I've heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth. This is after he started coming back out of all his trouble. He says, now I see. He saw it before, but he was taught to unsee it. And the world teaches us to unsee the blessings of God. He said, now I've heard thee by the hearing of the ear, but now I see, now mine eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. He just sat down in like a burned out campfire circle and just covered himself with ashes. He was ready to die, but he was getting it again. And in verse 10 it says, and the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. And the Lord also gave Job twice as much as he had before. It wasn't just him praying for his friends and then boom, he had twice as much. I mean, Hollywood couldn't even do that, you see. I mean, he turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. It's a whole attitude. He'd been complaining to his friends, you know, for 6 months, spouting all this junk off to them, you see, bringing them down. You know, and so he changed his mind, he changed his heart, he changed his actions. And also the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before, is the end of that verse 10. Twice as much. 42:12-17. So the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels and 1,000 yoke of oxen and 1,000 she-asses. And the Lord is able to bless Job double because he disciplined himself to be twice as good in his thought life about himself and about God. Twice as good in his words. What do you hear yourself saying, even to yourself? Twice as good in his expectations of God's ability to supply. If you say, God, how come I don't? He's saying, I've already done it. I've already given it to you. Go get it. There's no magic. It's already been supplied through Christ. It's already here. Job became twice the man that he was before. How would you like to be twice as good? How would you like your history to be twice as good as you could even imagine? It can. Job also had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he called the name of the first Jemima, and the name of the second Keziah, and the name of the third Kiran-Hapuk. And 15, and in all the land were no women found so fair as the daughters of Job, and their father gave them inheritance among their brethren. This is probably about a 30-year span that it took him to get it back. Everybody thinks it just happened, boom, boom. You pray for your friends and I got it. Nothing works like that, folks. It's mind and action and intensity. It's all that energy. Everybody knows that. An inheritance to women was unheard of at that time. Nobody did that. Women were more considered property than property holders. I mean, Job was a Renaissance man, and Moses heard this. And you see what's in the Old Testament and the New Testament treats women totally different than any other religion does. Verse 16, after this lived Job 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. So Job died, being old and full of days. See, Moses was mentored by Job as well as Jethro. And these are the lessons he trained himself to live over and over and over. Moses took 40 years to really grasp this message, and then he walked back. Now, maybe you don't have 40 years left. What could you do in 4 months with that kind of intensity? Or 4 years? I'll guarantee you could change your life. You could change it in 4 days somewhat. Not going to make a habit. You see, this amazing believing mindset and lifestyle is what gave Moses the ability to walk into Egypt, 80 years old, and walk out with all the wealth of the world, as well as setting millions of slaves, the children of Israel, free. Look at the fight it took in the Civil War to free some slaves. How many hundreds of thousands of people died? Whereas Moses was able to leave and there wasn't a feeble knee among all the children of Israel. Is that miraculous? Everybody getting healed, from old to young? The clothes didn't wear out for 40 years. Manna appeared every day for them to eat. A cloud protected them from the heat of the day. A pillar of fire by night. 40 years this happened. For 40 more years, he led these hard-hearted people until the ones remaining saw things the way that he had learned from Job and from Jethro, and began to practice them. Those are the ones that went into the promised land. And it's that same mindset that will take us into our promised land. The hidden story of Job contains a deeply ingrained template for success that Moses took with him as he returned to Egypt and fought to lead the children of Israel out of captivity. To be able to deal with the pressures of returning to Egypt to confront the most powerful man on earth and to organize millions of people to move in unison, Moses had to have already put this stuff into work in his mind and life. Nothing but complete godly success had become Moses' mindset and time-honed lifestyle. This lesson of Job was the first book Moses ever penned. It contained the greatest of all practical lessons, that deeply ingrained positive actions, honed into an art form over time, will mold us into who we are designed to be and will give us what we're designed to have. We've all heard that history repeats itself. Let's put in the work to make our history great. It's time we changed our history. God bless.